Ladies and gentlemen, welcome, and thank you for joining today's web conference, the Moving to Work Expansion Cohort 1 webinar. Please note that all participant lines will be muted until we reach a Q&A portion of the call. We will provide you with instructions on how you can ask a verbal question at that time. You are also welcome to submit written questions during the presentation, which will be addressed during Q&A. To submit a written question, please use the chat panel on the right-hand side of your screen and make sure to choose all panelists from the Send To drop-down menu. If, however, you require technical assistance, please send a note directly to me, the event producer, or call our help desk at 888-796-6118. With that, I'll turn the call over to Marianne Nazaro, Director of the Moving to Work demonstration. Marianne, please go ahead.
Great, thank you, and good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. My name is Marianne Nazaro, and I am thrilled to be here with you today. Before we get started, I wanted to go over just a couple more logistics for today. Again, there will be 2 breaks during today's presentation for you to ask questions, so please think about what your questions are and be prepared to ask us any questions. You can ask them either verbally or through the chat screen. This webinar is being recorded, and it will be available on our website after this webinar, so please take a look at HUD.gov for more information on that. And if following this webinar you have any questions whatsoever relating to this first cohort of the MTW expansion, please don't hesitate to send an email to us at mtwcohort1@hud.gov. And please note that we regularly update the website with information relating to the expansion and FAQs relating to Cohort 1. Again, thank you for coming today. My name is Marianne Nazaro. I am the director, and with me today in the room is John Concannon, the Deputy Director of the Moving to Work Demonstration Program. And also with me in the room today is Ann Fletcher, the Social Science Analyst with the HUD's Office of Policy Development and Research, and she's here to answer any questions that might come up relating to the research methodology for Cohort 1. And on the phone, joining us, I'm really thrilled that both Matthew Mainville from the Holyoke Housing Authority and Chris Lamberty from Lincoln Housing Authority are here on the phone. They're going to tell you a little bit of what it's like on the ground as an MTW agency. Lincoln has been an MTW agency really from the beginning, and Holyoke is one of our newer MTW agencies. So they can give you a really good kind of breadth of experience and knowledge for MTW demonstration. And then we're also going to be talking about kind of what is the purpose of Cohort 1, how MTW can benefit your agency, and really more importantly, how you yourself can become an MTW agency. So first, John is going to give you a little bit of a background about what is Moving to Work, how it came to be, what are some of the things that the current agencies are doing, how we've used Moving to Work to inform industry. And then we will hear from Matt and Chris, who will again talk to you about what it's like to be a Moving to Work agency on the ground. And then I will describe the MTW expansion, which was authorized in the 2016 Appropriations Act, and answer any questions that you might have relating to the notice to solicit interest for the very first cohort of the MTW expansion. And then there's going to be a couple opportunities for questions throughout the afternoon. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to John, Deputy Director, and John, take it away.
Okay. Thanks, Marianne. And this is John Concannon. Just wanted to give a background on MTW, and because we know there are those of you out there with a lot of familiarity with the Moving to Work program. You may have spoken to neighboring housing authorities who have MTW status, done a lot of research, and there may be others who are, hearing about it for the first time. So we just want to give a little bit of a high level what MTW is and where we've been the past 20 years. So MTW was enacted in the Appropriations Act of 1996. This is kind of right in the midst of welfare reform, so that's why we have this Moving to Work name. It's a bit of a misnomer. We get a lot of questions all the time from participants, but it's really a housing authorities, and we'll get into really what it is. There are 39 MTW housing authorities across the country, representing both small and large communities. We've only been able to designate as many moving to work housing authorities as Congress authorizes. So that's why we've been at this 39 number for a few years now, and we're happy to get up to 139 soon. But based on 2017 numbers, these 39 agencies, a lot of them are really largest agencies, and moving into medium and some small, represent around $4 billion of federal housing assistance. That's public housing and vouchers. That's about 17% of the overall funding, and these agencies represent about 14% of the entire public housing stock. So just to give you kind of a scope. But what is MTW? MTW really is about the opportunity to design and test locally designed housing and self-sufficiency strategies. And we really focus on the local because we know at HUD that you know your communities a lot better than we do. So we want you to be able to use this MTW flexibility to address whatever the local issue is. If it's around leasing in the voucher program, or housing stock issues on the public housing side, or may not be enough homelessness resources. We know you can dedicate your MTW initiatives and target those. Now, MTW gives PHAs the ability to design and test these approaches and providing and administering housing assistance in a more cost-effective way. Now, we do say design and test. We understand that communities are often trying things and they may not work. We're not punitive in this office. We encourage kind of innovation, and we know sometimes things may not go the way they're planned. So we kind of work with housing authorities and tweak and fine-tune them, and so that they're achieve the desired outcome. MTW also allows PHAs exceptions to certain public housing and housing choice voucher rules. We have broad waiver authority, and it enables housing authorities to use public housing and HCV funds flexibly. And I think there's a slide later on that really targets that. Or actually, we may have cut that out. But it's really that's sort of a core and often cited kind of biggest strength to MTW is being able to take your capital funds, your operating funds, and your housing choice voucher funds and use them interchangeably. Now that doesn't mean if you don't have a voucher program, you're not eligible, or if you have, don't have a public housing program, there are still positive benefits for MTW housing authorities. But we allow, this fungibility or this what we call the single fund flexibility amongst funding. So we'll maybe Matt and Chris can also talk about how they utilize that at the local level. Now, when MTW was designed in 1996, it was a really concise statute. It was one page, but it really talked about everything that an MTW housing authority does, policy-wise, has to be tied to one or more of these three statutory objectives, and they center around cost effectiveness. So that's reducing costs and achieving greater cost effectiveness in federal expenditures. That's really, we've seen that many different ways around running your programs more efficiently using MTW flexibility, maybe lessening voucher costs to serve more families. We've seen this in a variety of different ways. Development, simplification. Second objective is around self-sufficiency. And this is giving incentives to families to find employment and become self-sufficient. We can, again, using your MTW funding flexibility, MTW housing authorities can dedicate more funds. Say if you have an FSS program, you could augment that program using, say, voucher funds. Or if you don't have an FSS program, you could create something like that using your MTW funding. And these are all just limited examples. And then the third statutory objective is around housing choice, increasing housing choices for low-income families. And that's both in the public housing program, preserving units, building new units, and voucher program and project-based voucher program. The next slide is really around uses of MTW flexibilities. And we could talk all day about this slide. And I'm just going to touch on sort of a few. And those of you, if you have questions around certain things, you're wondering if, if that's an issue for your community or a barrier in running your voucher or public housing program, then please ask. But just a couple of examples. In the top left, we talk about using MTW funds to leverage funds. We've seen this quite a bit in the RAD program. MTW housing authorities, we've had around 75% of the current MTW housing authorities either apply to RAD or already have converted some of their projects. And I think a big advantage for MTW housing authorities is being able to use their funds to fill any financing gap, MTW funds, that may exist. Also, if, say, rents aren't penciling out and this deal isn't cash flowing, augmenting contract rents when you convert over to RAD PBV. And this is spelled out a little bit in the RAD notice, too. But we've seen a lot of development, and we've seen a lot of non-RAD development, too, using MTW funds to construct project-based voucher and LIHTC properties. So we've seen a lot in the development realm. In that same cost savings, we have simplification of rent calculations. And I'm going to leave that to Holyoke and Lincoln to talk more about, because I see that in both of your slides. But there's a lot of rent simplifications that are happening. And in self-sufficiency, I talked just a moment ago about creating self-sufficiency programs, creating incentives for families to become self-sufficient and graduate the program. There are a lot of different avenues to take. And kind of the third bucket of housing choice, these bottom two cells, when we talk about landlord incentive programs and encouraging moves to opportunity areas, this is something we've seen a lot of lately following the Raj Chetty research and with the implementation of small area FMRs. MTW housing authorities are able to use their funding to, say, provide incentives to landlords who might otherwise not join the program. Could be a 1-month HAP incentive for new landlords who aren't on the program. It could be an incentive to retain these landlords to hold this unit for a Section 8 renter. And encouraging moves to opportunity areas. It could be, we're able, under the MTW program, you can set your payment standard within the basic range of the FMR. In our operations notice, we increase that basic range up to certain levels where that would really hopefully get your family into those quote-unquote higher opportunity areas. So I think it's even better for I'll have Matt and Chris talk a bit certain things that are happening at their agencies. But on this next slide around how has MTW impacted the industry, this is something we hear a lot from industry and from Capitol Hill and PHAs saying, what's happening in this black box at MTW? And there's a lot happening, and I think we could do a better job messaging it. We're trying to do that. But a lot of what you've seen the past few years, say, in the streamlining rule, a lot of what we saw in there came from things that MTW housing authorities had pioneered. Similarly with HOTMA, a lot of the changes in HOTMA, MTW housing authorities have tested and proven to be successful. So we've really benefited from what they've tried. Now the The next slide just shows a map of the MTW housing authorities spread across the country. And, we're going to hear from Lincoln, Nebraska, and from Holyoke, Massachusetts right now. But you may be looking at this and saying, there's some concentrations on the coasts. There is a piece in the provision in the 2016 applications that talks about geographic diversity. So we're trying to, spread MTW to parts of the country where there currently aren't agencies. Mary Ann's going to talk about that because you've probably seen that's included in the Cohort 1 solicitation notice. But with that, Matt, I'm going to turn it over to you, and if you could share a bit about how you've used your MTW designation at Holyoke.
Sure. I appreciate that, John. Well, first off, I'd just like to comment a little bit about Holyoke itself. We were one of the last groups to join MTW, so we have a little bit different perspective than Lincoln. Although overall the program is good, we do have somewhat different experiences. Holyoke is among the smaller of the agencies that's included in the 39. We have somewhere around 2,500 units. We also are a community that has a significant number of challenges. I often say that we're at the top of the list that people don't want to be the top of the list for. Unemployment, high poverty, school dropout, teen pregnancy. These types of things are what face our community. And I know John had talked a little bit about the idea of local. That's what's really been very encouraging for us here in Holyoke, is that we've been able to target these particular issues that are facing our communities. So we, as you can see from the slide, we have tackled some of the low-hanging fruit, streamlined our utility allowance, which has allowed us to create some efficiency for our staff, has also actually, at the end of the day, created an economic benefit to the authority as well. We, in our report that will be submitted very soon, Mary Ann, we've recognized about a $38,000 savings for the last quarter of 2018. It's done a couple of things. It's created some efficiency, it's created accuracy, but also benefit the authority with dollars and cents. We have partnered with the Sheriff's Department. We recognized with the Hampden County Sheriff's Department that there was a problem with people being reintroduced into the population, being able to find stabilized housing. So what we were able to do is partner with them to provide vouchers to people coming out of pre-release and post-release programs. We did this on a shallow subsidy, which allowed us to not necessarily use the FMRs, but allowed us to simply give them a monthly dollar allowance. So that's been very successful. We've been able to house people throughout, not just Holyoke, but with their mobility, they've moved to neighboring areas of higher opportunity. We've also taken on neighborhood revitalization with our single fund flexibility, and in addition with some flexibility around our project-based vouchers. Holyoke has seen a significant amount of expiring use programs, so what we've been able to do is create an activity that allowed us to do project basing after the unit has bought out their loans to maintain the affordability of the units. We have about a 7 to 10 year wait list on our public housing, so we recognize that this is an important resource here in Holyoke, and to lose those would have been very problematic and made the problem even worse. So we've been able to work with the MTW office to create an activity that would allow us to then be able to project-base those properties and keep them on the affordable roll. So that was really a very important thing for us here in Holyoke. We've also taken on rent simplification. One of the things that we've been able to do here is around the college deduction, full-time student deduction. As opposed to having to calculate, we simply have a flat level dollar that we give folks no matter what they're earning. So if you're a full-time student in a household, what we've done as opposed to having to do a calculation, we simply give everybody the $450 and that's it. So that again, a couple of things are really captured there. We're allowing and incentivizing people to go to school, but at the same time, we're creating efficiencies for our staff. And our file reviews are significantly better because it's a simple process without math calculations. And then I know John also had talked about the opportunity for MTW agencies to design and test. One of the slides I put on here was Career Advancement Program. And this was a refreshing thing for us here in Holyoke. We had been used to the model of HUD slapping us on the wrist if something didn't work. So our staff, when we did this career advancement, this was an effort to do an income forgiveness over 5 years. So if someone was unemployed, went through a certification process, got a job, and saw their income increase significantly, that would have then impacted their rent. We were going to forgive that over the course of a period of time. We also have a very successful FSS program, and we recognized, unfortunately, that the escrow program through our FSS was outcompeting our career advancement program. So staff, we were all scared. We didn't know what the heck to do, and we simply called the MTW office and said, you know, this doesn't seem to be working. And we were waiting with bated breath to get the, oh my God, you guys are a bunch of goofballs. But quite honestly, what came back was, okay, we understand that. Here's how you get out of that particular activity. So we were excited about, you know, this new partnership with HUD, and I think that's what kind of MTW does. It allows us to have a different type of relationship with the offices. Just this past year, we've also, although we haven't actually embarked on the activities, our plan just was approved, but we did take on the idea of homelessness. We also have a problem with kids aging out of foster care and not having permanent housing, so we've been able to create an activity that's going to address that. And then we've also had a very poor performance in our school systems. We've had a high dropout rate in our high school. So we are currently working with the school department to address teenage homelessness and other ways that we might be able to improve attendance and therefore improve our class production. So those are some of the activities that we've been able to undertake with this flexibility. I'll give you 2 seconds on what I think is good and what you should be kind of aware of. Holyoke has, first and foremost, I think what it's really done for our staff is really become an invigorating tool for us to really rethink how we do business here at the Holyoke Housing Authority. As opposed to our previous mindset is, okay, these are the regulations and we have to work to those regulations. What we're able to do now is come to the office and think creatively about how we can help our community with HUD resources. And it's really a different way of thinking, but it's really been energizing. I've been at the agency for 20 years, and the last, well, let's see, can't do the math quite, 6 years have been probably the best because we've been able to really kind of think about how can we do development, how can we address homelessness, how can we address those issues that are really impacting Holyoke. And not just because Marianne's on the phone, we've really had a great opportunity to interact with the MTW office themselves. We found them to be very helpful as opposed to the, you know, a punitive situation. It's really been helpful. And actually, we've had situations where they have suggested activities or suggested other places that they have seen activities that might be helpful to Holyoke. So it's been a refreshing way of looking at how to do business and what the relationship between HUD and the Housing Authority really is. The single fund flexibility, I think, is another thing that can't be understated. The ability to be able to shift monies from your Housing Choice Voucher program to do development, to be able to use public housing funds to offset FSS costs, I think is really pretty critical and has allowed us to really do our job well. A couple of things that we did as we were going through the application process, and what we continue to do is look at the baseline number of families. So, you know, my suggestion to those folks that would apply, and I would encourage everyone to apply because it really is a great program, but going into it, I would make sure that you understand clearly what your baseline numbers look like. I'm not intimately familiar with the cohort that's being put out currently, but in our experience, it was important for us to know what our baseline number of families being served was. Also have a really good understanding of your financing formulas. I think that's an important thing to also, what does the process look like for getting your new activities approved? So just be aware of those things, think those things through. They shouldn't be seen as an obstacle, but simply should be something that you think about as you're entering into the program. And overall, the Holyoke Housing Authority's experience has been quite good. It's been outstanding. So we're excited about being part of the 39. We're excited about 139. So that's kind of where we are here in Holyoke.
Thank you, Matt. That was a great overview. And feel free to submit your MTW report as late as you would like. But no, I know it's hard to summarize everything that you do, so we really appreciate that. We're going to have time for questions in a moment. Before that, Chris, I want to turn it over to you. If you could share with us how MTW is working for you in Lincoln.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad to be here. This is Chris Lamberty. I'm the director of the Housing Authority in Lincoln, Nebraska, and we applied for moving to work status way back in 1996 when it first came out, and we were awarded that and have been operating in that model ever since then, since the late 90s. And similar to what Matt and John talked about, I think one of the reasons that we are boosters and supporters of moving to work and supporters of expanding moving to work by 100 agencies and hopefully 1,000 agencies someday is that it really does allow you to operate in a way that makes you think about the HUD programs differently. The level of flexibility that you have to rethink how you run your programs leads to more locally driven solutions and a more problem-solving culture within your organization, so that you can, like some of the things Matt talked about, look at what the needs of your community and your population are, what the economic environment is, what the political environment is, and then design programs and solutions around that, and allows you to look at the current HUD programs and see what works well for you and what doesn't, and start making some changes. So that what we do as a moving to work agency and what Matt might do as a moving to work agency is not going to be the same as what you as a moving to work agency do. It's all locally based, although we like to steal ideas from each other. It's still going to be locally tweaked and locally based. So I'm going to talk about just 3 fairly straightforward initiatives that we've been doing over the years. In Lincoln, one of our focuses was simplifying some of the complicated processes within our programs. And one of the ways we've done that was through our rent structure. About 10 years ago, we redesigned our rent structure and switched away from the standard 30% of adjusted income model and went to a straight, basically a 27% of gross income with no deductions. So tried to greatly simplify how that calculation was done to make it easier to understand for our tenants and our landlords and the public, and a lot easier for our staff to administer. And really what our goal was there was to maintain an income-based rent structure. We didn't really want to decouple it from income, and still maintain a fair way of calculating rent and subsidy, but also just make it simpler for everyone involved. One of the measurements we use on, how it might be simpler is we've done time studies on how long it takes to do annual recertifications and certifications for our rent structure versus the HUD rent structure. And we did a number of other simplifications in addition to our rent structure, but we cut about 1/3 of our processing time on our annual research just by simplifying some of the rent structure and some of our other processes. So that's not the only measure, but that's one measure of how we've simplified. The other focus we had from the beginning, we kind of took, and it was in the context of welfare reform when all this came out, and we took the word work literally in the title, and we had a thought process back in the 90s about how we could encourage work and build an expectation of work into our program. And we didn't want to create a complicated requirement to work that was going to be hard for tenants to comply with and hard for us to administer. So what we came up with was something we call minimum earned income, which is a basic expectation that anyone receiving housing subsidies who is work able should either be working at a part-time minimum wage job or participating in job training or education programs that are getting towards that. And so we just count as a minimum level of earned income if there's one adult in the household, it's at least a part-time job at minimum wage. We count that much income in their household. If they're earning less than that, we bring them up to a higher level of income. If they're earning more, we count what they're actually earning. That amount goes up depending on how many adults are in the household. But everyone who walks in our door, every time we do a recertification, we have a conversation about working at least a part-time job as a minimum expectation as part of our program. There's obvious exceptions for elderly, disabled, and a number of other exemptions. And then finally, I was just going to talk about something we've done more recently around landlord incentives. Like every other market in the country, it seems like the last few years, the rental market's been really, really tight. We have struggled to keep landlords in our program. People with vouchers are struggling to find units that will take their vouchers. We saw our success rates drop a little bit in our voucher program, which means people aren't getting leased up with their vouchers. And we saw the overall number of landlords in our program dropping. So we did some brainstorming around what are things we can do to keep our current landlords in the program and not lose them, and what are some incentives we can throw out there to attract new landlords who are thinking about renting to a voucher. So one of the items we came up with is what's called the landlord incentive HAP, which is really the easiest way to describe that is it's a signing bonus. Anyone who signs up a voucher or leases up a voucher in landlord, we give them an additional $150. It's not a lot of money, but a $150 signing bonus, which is basically a recognition that working with the voucher program is extra work. We probably are going to have to increase that at some point, but even though it's not a huge amount, it has had an impact and has helped us keep our landlords and has helped and allows us another tool to throw out to new landlords that are thinking about leasing up a voucher. At least if they're going through an inspection with us, we can say we can give you an extra $150 at the end. So those are three things we've done. And I guess I would just end with one of the things I'm most excited about this cohort is that I personally would like to see moving to work expanded beyond 100 more agencies to more of the normal way that we operate our housing programs for a lot of the reasons that Matt talked about earlier. And when you talk about expanding moving to work substantially beyond in large numbers, most housing authorities across the country are pretty small. And so you're going to be expanding it to small agencies. And what this cohort offers is an opportunity to think about what are the challenges for small agencies in implementing some of these locally based initiatives. Because most of the current moving to work agencies are pretty large. They're mostly larger than 1,000 units, that's for sure. And so there's more staff, more ability to handle some of these things. And so I'm really interested through this expansion with what the effect is and what that means for being able to expand moving to work going forward. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Chris. Again, there's an awful lot going on in Lincoln. Really appreciate you sharing a piece of it. You know, I don't even think I need to touch on how can MTW benefit your agency, because I think you both did such an excellent job. One thing I will just touch on is, before questions, is just sort of the last bullet is around, we talk about creating local, non-traditional housing programs. In the MTW program, you know, we have the Section 8 and Section 9 program, but we're able to create sort of this third box that we call the local non-traditional housing program. And it's spelled out more in the operations notice, but it really talks to, you know, if the Section 8 or public housing program isn't adequately serving your community, you know, it just provides us with another avenue to really target whatever issue that is. So sort of that'd be a whole another you know, hour-long webinar just to get into that. But there is a lot of flexibility under MTW. But with that, I think, Viju, we're going to open it up to questions.
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, as we move into Q&A, please note that you can press #2 on your telephone keypad to enter the question queue. Once your telephone line has been unmuted, you can then state your name and question. Also, please note that you can submit a written question using the chat panel on the right-hand side of your screen, making sure to choose all panelists from the Send To drop-down menu.
So I think we already have a question in our chat feature. Matt, this is for you, and it's how has Holyoke streamlined its utility allowance schedule?
I think I have. I was just trying to pick up off the speaker, so I apologize about that. So what we have done with our utility allowance is that as opposed to doing building types, we've simply just by bedroom count, and that's basically it. So we've really simplified the fact that you just get a flat rate based on bedroom count, not by building type or any other factor. It's just really very simplistic. And like I said, it's really, our staff has found it very helpful.
I would add that we've done the same thing in Lincoln. We have a single utility allowance by bedroom size, and it is really simple.
Thank you both. Our next question is Kelly in Boulder County, and her question is that housing authorities presenting have full choice to what MTW activities they're doing. With this current cohort, would we be required to only engage in certain MTW activities, or would we still have full ability to choose what MTW activities to?
About that.
Okay. And Mary Ann's going to get into that exactly in her presentation. And let's see. So the question is, are you using, for MTW, are you using existing funds, or will additional funds be provided as part of MTW status? Yeah, unfortunately, there are no new funds. You're using your existing voucher and public housing funds.
Do you mind if I just jump in?
Sure.
This is Matt from Holyoke. That's an accurate statement, but what we've been able to realize through like the utility allowance and creating the shallow subsidy with our with the Sheriff's Department, we've recognized some savings there that has allowed us to earmark those dollars to do other activities, partner with other organizations like the Holyoke Boys and Girls Club, and so you don't realize new funding, but you can be creative about how you use your dollars.
Thank you. That's important. Thank you for sharing that. And the next question is around how have the reporting requirements changed? Are there more or are there less? We've really tried to streamline reporting for the expansion agencies. Currently, the current 39 MTW housing authorities submit MTW and a full MTW report. If you open some of those, some of them will run into hundreds of pages. And so we really tried to simplify it by, all non-MTW housing authorities submit PHA plans, and so we are just appending, and we're calling the MTW supplement right now, to the PHA plan process. So you would indicate in this MTW form, along with the PHA plan, what you intend to do using your MTW status. We're trying to make it as simple as possible, where it's going through the public reporting Paperwork Production Act, excuse me. So we've published it once, and you can find it on our website. But it's just really trying to simplify it, and there is no longer any MTW report. Mary Ann can get into there are simplified when we talk about FOS and CMAP, there are less administrative requirements under MTW. There's a question, the next question is around what types of regulatory relief have you seen? And I think that gets into what we were talking about earlier in HOPMA and in the streamlining rule. We've seen MTW housing authorities implement sort of, whether it's their recertification schedule, re-exams, or HQS inspections, just a lot of regulatory relief through HOPMA that MTW housing authorities have championed. I don't know if you want to add to that, Marianne, any specific regulatory relief?
Yeah, so I mean, that's really what MTW is it allows the agency to really kind of figure out what would be best to meet the needs of its communities, and if there's a statutory or regulatory barrier for enabling you to do that, then MTW might be able to help you. So MTW could use MTW to waive, really any provision of the 1937 Act or implementing regulations, unless it's, Section 12, Section 18, and for the expansion agency, Section 9. But really, if there's something that your agency is trying to implement and the current regs and statute doesn't allow you to do, in many cases, MTW can be used to help get you there. And those are a lot of those activities that John talked about earlier and that Matt and Chris described. All of those are based on kind of a relief of some regulatory requirements.
And Viju, do we have any questions on the phone?
At this time, we have not received any questions on the phone. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, to dial into the phone line for a question, please hit #2 on your telephone keypad.
If there aren't any questions on the phone, then I think I'll pass it back to Marianne to get into more of this, the actual Cohort 1 notice.
Great. Thanks, John. And thanks, John. Thanks again, Matt and Chris. We really, really appreciate your sharing your specific examples and experience as a moving to work agency. I think that really helps a lot for potential agencies to understand how it's benefited your agency, your community, and helped you kind of think differently as a public housing authority. So now I'd like to turn our thoughts to the moving to work expansion. As you know, because you were on this call, and we are really excited that in 2016, Congress authorized HUD to expand moving to work to 100 additional agencies. So we're going to be going from the current 39 agencies to 139 agencies. Congress required, and while John noted the original MTW statute was super short, this expansion statute from 2016 is super long, and they gave us all kinds of requirements that we needed to consider in expanding it. Part of that is that we need to, within each group of agencies that we bring on with this expansion, we need to study a specific policy change. And also Congress required that we consult with a research advisory committee to advise us on what policy changes we will study and how we will evaluate those. And I'll talk about that in just a moment with a little bit more detail on that. In addition, they put a lot of additional requirements on the MTW expansion and on HUD, quite frankly. They gave us 7 years to implement the expansion. So by 2022, all 100 new agencies will be designated as MTW. All of the new agencies must be high-performing in either FAS or CMAP. And it must represent a geographic diversity. So as John noted on the previous slide when we showed you the map of where the existing agencies are, and a lot of them are on the coast with kind of a splattering in the middle, Congress is really requiring us to take a look at where housing authorities are, where people are living, and to really take geographic diversity into consideration as we bring on the new agencies. And then in addition, on this next slide, Congress required specific size requirements for the expansion agencies. So as both Matt and Chris noted, they're on kind of the smaller spectrum of our existing agencies. They're still over 1,000 units for each of them. With the expansion, Congress is requiring half of the new agencies, 50 of the 100 new agencies have to have under 1,000 aggregate units, under 1,000 public housing and voucher units. Currently, of our 39 agencies, we only have one agency that fits that, which is Keene, New Hampshire. 47 of the 100 agencies can be between 1 and 6,000 units, and we can have no more than 3 agencies with between 6 and 27,000 units. So the majority of these new agencies are going to be under 6,000 units. Of our existing 39 agencies, it's about half and half between the second and third bucket. So of the existing agencies, it's about half are between 1 and 6,000, and about the other half between 6 and 27,000. Going forward with the expansion, 97 out of 100 of the new agencies have to have less than 6,000 units, and half of them have to have less than 1,000. So it's you guys. So we really encourage you to apply. And no agencies over 27,000, and that's really like NYCHA, Puerto Rico, that types of things. There's a couple other considerations that Congress included in the expansion statute, including that of the 100, 5 have to have portfolio-wide RAD conversions, and they introduced this concept called kind of a regional MTW agency, where an existing agency can partner with a adjacent non-MTW agency and then use its flexibilities there. And so next, I'd like to talk a bit about the what we will be evaluating with these cohorts. As I mentioned earlier, with the expansion, Congress is really requiring HUD to evaluate specific policy changes within each cohort. So currently for the 39 agencies, we've really put the burden on the agencies. So for every single MTW initiative that the current agencies implement, Matt and Chris and their counterparts have to evaluate and tell HUD, okay, what do we expect this to be, what do we expect the outcomes to be, and then report on what they actually achieved. With the expansion, we took that burden of the evaluation from the agencies and we brought that back to HUD, or to my partners in the Office of Policy Development and Research, Ann and her peers. And so we consulted with the Research Advisory Committee at the requirement of Congress. The committee consisted of MTW agencies, both executives and residents. So thank you, Chris, for being one of our committee members. It consisted of researchers, expert researchers, and it consisted of HUD staff, myself and Todd Richardson in the Office of Policy Development and Research. Over the course of several phone calls, one in-person meeting, and then many more phone calls, the committee came up with 4 recommended policies that HUD evaluate through the expansion, and then they gave us their suggested method of evaluating it. So they want us to study MTW as a flexibility, rent reform, work requirements, and landlord incentives. This first cohort of MTW agencies HUD is going to be evaluating MTW as a flexibility in this first cohort of MTW agencies, where we compare about 30 agencies with about 30 that were not selected as MTW. We compare overall aggregate outcomes, and then we see if there's any difference in the outcome. So if we could go on to the next slide here, a little bit more detail on this. I'm going to try to answer a question that was raised earlier. This first cohort of agencies is available to the smallest of the new agencies, so agencies with 1,000 or under aggregate public housing or voucher units. The MTW agencies in this cohort will be able to those agencies that are designated through this cohort will be able to implement any and all MTW flexibilities without restriction. They will be able to implement agency-specific MTW waivers. They will be able to implement rent reform. They will be able to implement landlord incentives. They will be able to implement work requirements. Any MTW flexibility that is available through the operations notice and the expansion, and any locally driven waiver activity that the agency comes up with will be able to be implemented through this initial cohort. So we're not specifically telling you what to study. We're just saying, hey, you're MTW, you've got this flexibility, you can use your funding flexibly, and here's, the broad array of types of activities that you can do. We're targeting those smaller agencies and up to 30 housing authorities will be selected through this initial cohort to participate in the expansion. So we initially, in October, we published the notice to both that really describes what we're looking for in this initial cohort. It's a two-step, and then we, letters of intent were due in January during the lapse of appropriation. So because of that, we've extended the time frame for agencies to apply to this initial cohort. If you applied to the initial if you applied by the January 11th deadline, you don't need to apply again. But if you didn't apply, you have the opportunity until May 13th to submit your letter of interest. It's a pretty simple two-step process. So the first step is that if you're interested in moving to work, you need to submit a letter of interest to HUD by May 13th, letting us know that you're interested. You need to include with that a board resolution so that we know that your board is aware that you're interested. And you also need to submit and take the baseline survey, which is included in the letter of interest notice in the 2018-17 notice. So you need to take a baseline survey so we know kind of what your baseline is when you come in. And I think Matt or Chris spoke to that earlier. What we'll do once we receive those, after May 13th, we'll receive all of those letters of interest. We'll put them in a lottery, and we will invite, we'll determine eligibility based on the May 13th date. Once we've determined how many agencies are eligible, we'll put them through the lottery, and we will invite about half of them to apply. And so the second step is we will invite about half of the agencies to submit their application to HUD to obtain MTW designation. And that application is a 10-page document that you will develop in close coordination with your community, with your residents, and your stakeholders to describe, like, what do you want to do with MTW? John talked about the 3 statutory objectives, how we're going to achieve one of those 3 statutory objectives, what rent policy you're going to be considering to implement, that type of thing. All of that is spelled out in the notice 2018-17. The only difference with the notice that we just published a couple weeks ago is that the due date is now, and eligibility is now in May instead of. And then we have a ton of information on our website, and so we encourage you to take a look at our website and click on the Cohort 1 MTW Flexibility link. In that we include both notices relating to this Cohort 1. So the first one we published was 2018-17. We have published that in October, and then we extended the time frame for submitting letters of interest. That one was published in that's notice 2019-3. We include an FAQ document, and the FAQs are updated regularly. So as we get a question from an individual, rather than just responding to that one individual and only that person knows the answer, we answer all of the questions through the FAQ, which is available on the HUD's website for all interested housing authorities. We will link, there's also a link to a webcast that we put together on the selection notice, so if you want to see what we look like, there's that. There's also an eligibility worksheet, so that kind of tells you, like, here, there's a list of eligibility thresholds in the notice, and you can go through that to see if that meets you, and any attachments and standard forms as well. All of that is available on our website. And then, what's next? So, our anticipated timeline for the expansion for, again, this is really specifically for Cohorts 1 and Cohort 2, is that this spring, we extended the time frame for agencies interested in the initial cohort. We published the notice for Cohort 2, so for those larger agencies that might be interested in MTW that don't qualify under the 1,000 or less units, those agencies are able to apply under Cohort 2. We're going to be publishing the final MTW operations notice later on this spring. So that's gone through a couple rounds of public comment. We are in the final stages of updating it based on the comments we've received, and then it's got to go through some clearances before we can publish it. Later on this summer, we will, after the operations notice is finalized, and we will invite those agencies that kind of are eligible and kind of made it through that lottery for that initial cohort to submit their 10-page application. And then we will designate them later on this fall. And then also later on this fall, we'll invite agencies in the second cohort to submit applications, and we'll designate that second cohort later on in 2020. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to be implementing, bringing on agencies in cohorts 3 and 4, which will study work requirements and landlord incentives, and we will bring all of the new 100 agencies on board by 2022. So that was a lot of information, and so we are here. John and I are here from the MTW side, and is here from the policy development and research side, and Matt and Chris are still on the line as well if you have any other questions for them. So we are here to answer any other last questions that you might have. And Viju, could you please remind people how they can submit questions?
Absolutely. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, to submit a phone question, please place yourself into the question queue by dialing #2. Otherwise, submit a written question using the chat panel on the right-hand side of your screen. We actually did get a phone question this time.
Excellent.
Caller, your line is going to be unmuted. Please state your name and question.
Will this be available as a recording later?
Yes, this webinar will be available as a recording, and it'll be available on HUD's website, yes.
Thank you.
And at this time, that was our only phone question.
Okay, well, we've got 2 questions here in the queue. So the first one is for clarity on the deadline for the expansion for Cohort 1. Yeah, so the May 13th date is the due date for Cohort 1 to submit letters of interest with the accompanying board resolution, and they need to take the baseline survey, the research survey at that time. At that point, we will determine the eligibility, go through a lottery. If you make it out on the other side of the lottery, then we will invite you to submit your application, and then that application needs to go through while it's a pretty, it's only a 10-page document, you need to go work with your community and your public process on that. So you'll get several months to submit your application, and then we will designate those agencies for the first cohort later on this calendar year. And so by 2020, you will be full on MTW. John, any clarification?
I was just going to add sort of the question that also asked about rolling out program changes. We really defer to the agency in terms of pacing, because as we've heard from Lincoln and Holyoke, it's really a rethinking of how you operate as a PHA, how you can interact with your community, and how you can better serve your residents. So, we've had housing authorities come onto the MTW program, do somewhat radical rent reform changes and a lot of big changes, and then realize down the line that maybe they move too quickly. And so we would just say take a deliberate approach, if you want to do sort of incremental changes and ratchet up MTW, but it's really up to the how.
Great. Thanks, John. There's another question here. What information should be included in the letter of interest? I'll refer you back to the notice 2018-17, includes all of the requirements relating to kind of what needs to be submitted for this Cohort 1. So the information relating to what information needs to be included in the letter of interest is on page 7, section 4A, and it says that the letter of interest has to state the PHA's desire in obtaining MTW designation, and it can be no more than 2 pages. We did not provide a required format for that. We leave that up to the agency, but it does need to say that you are interested, and it needs to be accompanied by the board resolution, and there's certification to participate in an evaluation as well. Another question, Chris, I think this one's for you. Do you experience fewer interim rent changes due to the policies on minimum wage jobs in Lincoln?
I don't know if it's directly, yes, we do a lot less interim rent changes. I don't know if it's directly related to our minimum earned income requirement. We've implemented some other policies where we just do less interim rent changes due to work requirements. But yeah, if someone loses a job, then there could be an interim. Basically, we don't do an interim for a while, but in the end, if we do it, we would put them to at least the minimum earned income. And that does result in less requests for interims, yes.
Great. Thanks, Chris. There's a question from a PHA that has 208 housing choice vouchers, and I would say that agency, it depends as to whether or not the agency has any public housing units as to whether or not it's eligible in Cohort 1. The requirement for Cohort 1 is that you have under 1,000 aggregate housing choice voucher and public housing units. So if your agency has 208 housing choice voucher units and like 0 public housing units, then you're eligible under Cohort 1.
As long as you're a high performer in FOS or CMAP.
Correct. Thank you. We'll get to that. Oh, wait, and then there's another question on if you are put into the control group for Cohort 1, can you apply for the next cohort? Yes. Thank you for asking that question. Absolutely. If you submit your letter of interest for Cohort 1 and you are not invited to submit your application, you are welcome and encouraged to apply under future cohorts. So this next one, I'm going to ask Ann to take this. Can you scroll down a little bit?
Down?
So we can see the rest of the question. There. So the question here is, as I understand it, any PHA who applies but is not selected are required to be in the control group. How much burden would that be on the PHA? Being a small agency, that is a big con in our con list. And Ann, if you could address that.
Sure. Yeah, that's a very reasonable con, and we fully understand that's our goal, is to make it as minimal as humanly possible. Our estimate right now is that it will probably require 8 hours over a total of 3 years. Essentially what we're going to be doing is we'd like to track the outcomes of PHAs that are both chosen for MTW in Cohort 1 and not chosen for MTW in Cohort 1. So what you might expect is that you might have to do 2 email surveys over the course of 3 years and potentially have up to 2 conversations with the research team just about whether or not you're able to pursue any of the flexibilities you were hoping to pursue with MTW designation, even in the absence of getting MTW.
And so, and with that, we are actually out of, there's a question about what the board resolution needs to look like. Again, I encourage you to take a look at the notice 2018-17, but there was no requirement for what that looks like. And so, again, take a look at what the notice in 2018-17 for more information, but we did not prescribe a format for the board resolution. And then there's a question about, as a larger agency, when might I be able to apply under a future cohort? And those would be, those are going to be coming. Cohort 2 is coming. Cohort 3 and 4 will be coming, probably Cohort 3 later on this calendar year, and Cohort 4 early 2020. We'll be inviting applications for that one. So with that, and there's a question about, Chris, do you have any policies posted online? And I would, Chris, we're getting kicked out of this room, which is why I'm talking really fast right now. Thanks, Chris. So you can take a look at Lincoln's reports on their website at www.l-housing.com. And all of the approved and accepted MTW plans and reports are available on HUD's website. So So with that, I'd really like to thank you all so much for your time this afternoon. We are really excited about being able to expand MTW. I really encourage you to think about whether or not MTW makes sense. As Chris and Matt have pointed out, it's a great tool for housing authorities to just think differently about how to use their federal funds to best serve their families and their communities. So thank you very much, and have a great afternoon.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using AT&T Event Conferencing Enhanced. You may now disconnect.